I modified the Hopkins A pattern to make it much simpler to make and to add a pocket in the back so that you can insert a filter if you want. So I'm going to show you how to make this now. So no special equipment or anything needed, no twill tape, none of that. So the first thing you need to do is make some bias tape, and I make mine with 1 1/4 inch strips of fabric. So you need 2 of those, and then you're going to cut your fabric, add 1.5 inches to the length from the Hopkins pattern. So this is, and you can cut 1/2 inch off the sides. So this is 8.5 by 16.5. So I'm just gonna iron this. So the first thing you do is turn the short edges over 1/4 inch twice. So 1/4 inch and another 1/4 inch, just to make that to make that a finished edge, and then do the same thing on the other end. So we're going to take this over to the machine and stitch, edge stitch this down. Okay, so this has been stitched down on each end, and then you're going to fold up the bottom about 1.5 inches. You can get a ruler if you want to. This doesn't have to be exact. That's 1.5 inches. Then you're going to fold the top down. This is wrong sides together. You don't have to turn this when you do it this way. And fold it down. So we want this to overlap by 1 inch. So you can mark that with a pen if you want, or just eyeball it. Okay, then you can press. Okay, now flip this over. So this is going to be the pocket. So it has a nice overlap. So you're just going to flip that over to the back and then pleat this. So you can baste this down the sides if you want to, but you don't really have to. So just grab the sides and just eyeball it. So we're going to make 1, 2. You just pinch both layers of fabric and kind of scooch it up until you have 3 relatively even pleats. Just hold that down and give it a good press with steam. Hold all the layers together, flip it over, and then press it from the back too, just so those pleats are all nice and crisp and flat. And now there's no side seam over here, so there's no added bulk. So that makes it really easy to put the bias tape on. So we'll take our bias tape over to the machine and attach that. Okay, so just going to clip these threads. Alright, so you can, if you want to, try to start at one end of the bias tape and just stitch all the way down, but I find it easier to apply this like binding. So just find the center of the bias tape by folding this in half, and then put the center point on the middle of your mask, and then right sides together, and open up one flap, line up the raw edges, and start about 1/2 inch above the mask, and tack down your stitching, and then just sew. I'm sewing about maybe like a 1/16 of an inch away from the fold, so you have a little bit of give when you're wrapping this around, and just go straight down. It goes over those pleats very easily, and then back stitch at the end, and then take this off and flip it over, wrap the bias tape around the raw edge, so this encloses all the raw edges, and these threads from this that stitching you can just tuck right in there, and then start again in the same place, this time with the bias tape folded in half. So start stitching, back stitch, and then I use the inside edge of my presser foot so that I'm stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the bias tape. And you just want to make sure that when you get to the end that this is folded all the way in half, so that it covers up your stitching line the whole way across. So you have a little bit of give here because you didn't sew right on the ironed edge, so you can just pull this across to cover the first stitching line. Just go right down it, and then just tucking in these threads. You can clip them, but they tuck in really easily. So that is nice and lined up there, and then you're just gonna continue sewing to the end of the bias tape. So I hold this flat with my front hand, and then with this back hand I'm folding it in half as I go. And again, just sewing 1/8 of an inch from the folded edge. Because I cut my bias tape from selvage to selvage, so it's not actually bias tape, it's just a strip of fabric. You don't have to finish this edge because it's the selvage, it's not going to come unraveled. So I just sew all the way down almost to the end, and then I turn this sideways, and then I just stitch back and forth across the whole end, just to enclose that tube of bias tape. And if you have a raw edge there, you can fold it under twice and finish it, but since it's the selvage, you don't have to do that. It's just cosmetic. And then you go back to the other side where you started, and just finish stitching. You just start where you left off and finish stitching the other end of the tape to the end, and then repeat for the other side of the mask. Okay, so I have the bias tape attached to both sides and stitched all the way to the end, all 4 ends. The last thing I'm going to do is make a channel to hold a wire, so you can fit this to your nose. So what I do is just fold it in half to find the middle, and then I have this little ruler on my sewing table, so I just measure about 1 3/4 inches from the middle, put a pin, and then just stick a pin in the other side, and if you just pull that open, you'll have your 2 pins in the right place. I like to sew this from the back so I can make sure I'm not stitching over the pleats. So I'm going to sew from pin to pin, back stitching at each end with a 1/2 inch seam here. I'm just going to start at this pin. I'll take that out. And sew down to the other pin. So I clipped all my threads, and this is the finished mask. This is the front, and here's the back with the flap, so you can open this up, put any kind of filter in there that you feel comfortable using, and then you can just take a pipe cleaner or a twist tie or any wire that you have, and just slide it up here and thread it through that top pocket, and so you can form it to your nose. This is the old way I was doing these, which was to sew the side seams first, and then just have the two ends meet for the pocket. So, and I sewed about 1.5 inches in on either side. So this just has a lot more bulk. You can see it's twice as wide at least. So it was a lot harder to sew. This is so easy to go through these layers. And I like that it overlaps instead of just meeting. I feel like that's maybe a better design. I don't know. Things are changing so fast with the recommendations of these masks, but this is super fast. You can put the wire in, you can put a filter in, or you can just wear it as is if you don't have either of those things to add to it. It's really quick and a lot easier to sew through the sides. So I hope this helps some of you, and happy sewing, and be well.